The war room of the Hegemony flagship buzzed with quiet confidence, as holographic displays showed star charts spanning half the galaxy. Admiral Corvin traced his clawed finger across the projection, pausing at a small yellow star on the outer rim. 12 different alien species had built this empire together, conquering world after world with methodical precision. In 300 years, they had never faced serious resistance. "Tell me about this Earth again," Corvin said to his intelligence officer, a thin creature with 6 arms and compound eyes that never seemed to blink. The officer activated a new display showing intercepted transmissions from the target world. "Primitive beyond belief, Admiral. They still use chemical rockets for basic transport. Their weapons fire small metal projectiles instead of energy beams. Most embarrassing of all, they cannot even agree on a single government. The planet has nearly 200 separate nations, all arguing with each other." Corvin watched footage of human conflicts, seeing soldiers running across battlefields while explosions bloomed around them. They fight with such chaos. No coordination, no discipline. How did they even achieve spaceflight? "Barely, sir. They have a few small stations in orbit and some mining operations on their moon. Nothing that could threaten a proper military force. Our preliminary scans show their largest warship is smaller than one of our frigates." The Admiral studied more intelligence reports. Humans appeared to be a young species, having only left their homeworld in the past century. Their technology relied on crude fusion reactors and primitive computer systems. Their society seemed constantly on the verge of collapse, with endless wars, economic disputes, and political chaos. Every analysis suggested this would be the easiest conquest in hegemony history. "What about their population?" Corvin asked. "Nearly 8 billion, but spread across their entire planet. Most live in crowded cities with no military value. Their armies are small and poorly equipped. Even if they united every soldier on the planet, they would barely outnumber a single hegemony battle group." Corvin dismissed the displays with a gesture. This hardly seemed worth his personal attention. The humans had achieved interplanetary travel, which technically qualified them for hegemony membership, but they would need to be conquered first. Standard procedure demanded they be given the choice between submission and destruction. Most species chose submission once they saw what hegemony weapons could do. "I will not waste significant resources on this," Corvin decided. "Commander Vex can handle the operation with a minimal force. 3 cruisers and 50 support ships should be more than adequate." The intelligence officer nodded eagerly. "Shall I prepare the standard conquest protocol?" "Yes. But keep it simple. Demonstrate our superior firepower, demand surrender, accept their submission. The entire operation should take no more than a few days." Commander Vex received his orders with enthusiasm. The Drakmori had always excelled at intimidation, and his reptilian features could frighten most species into immediate compliance. He selected his ships carefully, choosing vessels with impressive weapon displays, but avoiding anything too destructive. The goal was conquest, not extermination. As the small fleet prepared to depart, Vex reviewed the intelligence files one more time. The humans seemed almost pathetically unprepared for contact with a galactic civilization. Their communication systems were primitive, their military doctrine was centuries behind hegemony standards, and their weapons technology belonged in a museum. The most telling detail was their response to their own astronomical observations. Human scientists had detected other civilizations in the galaxy, but their governments had chosen to ignore the implications. Instead of preparing defenses or attempting to make contact, they had continued their petty territorial disputes as if the universe contained only their single world. "Sir," his navigation officer reported, "we are ready to enter hyperspace." Vex settled into his command chair. already imagining the brief ceremony where human leaders would formally surrender their world to hegemony authority. Proceed. Set course for the Sol system. The journey took 12 days through hyperspace, giving Vex time to plan the demonstration that would convince the humans to surrender without unnecessary bloodshed. Intelligence reports suggested their military leaders were concentrated in several major command centers. A few precision strikes on empty areas near these centers should provide adequate motivation. When the fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, everything appeared exactly as predicted. The third planet showed the heat signatures of massive population centers, while scattered installations throughout the system confirmed human presence on multiple worlds. Their largest military vessels were indeed tiny compared to hegemony standards, and most seemed to be engaged in routine patrol duties rather than any kind of defensive preparation. "Open a communication channel to the third planet," Vex ordered. "Use their most common language and make sure the message reaches their primary government centers." The transmission was simple and direct, following protocols that had worked on dozens of worlds. Vex identified himself as a representative of the galactic hegemony, explained that humanity's system now fell under hegemony authority, and offered the choice between peaceful integration and military conquest. Standard terms included immediate surrender of all military forces, acceptance of hegemony law, and integration into the galactic economy under hegemony supervision. The response took nearly an hour to arrive, which Vex attributed to primitive communication systems and the need for human leaders to coordinate their surrender. When the message finally came through, it originated from what appeared to be a hastily organized coalition of human governments. An elderly human with gray hair and tired eyes appeared on the display. "I am Director Hayes of the Sol Defense Coalition. We have received your message and appreciate your interest in our system. However, we must respectfully decline your offer. We suggest you reconsider your position and withdraw from our territory." Vex stared at the transmission in disbelief. In 3 centuries of hegemony expansion, no species had ever rejected the initial offer of peaceful surrender. The humans seemed to be operating under some massive misunderstanding about their situation. "Sir," his weapons officer asked, "shall I prepare the demonstration?" Vex nodded grimly. Clearly these humans needed to see hegemony power before they would accept reality. "Target their lunar installation. Make it spectacular but avoid excessive damage. They will surrender once they understand what they face." Luna Station appeared peaceful in the pale light of Earth's moon. Its domes and communication arrays spread across the gray landscape like a small scientific outpost. Commander Vex studied the installation through his ship's sensors, noting the minimal defensive structures and what appeared to be fewer than 1,000 human personnel, the perfect target for a demonstration of hegemony superiority. "Tactical analysis confirms minimal threat," his weapons officer reported. "The installation appears to be primarily a research facility with basic habitat modules. I detect no significant weapons systems or shielding." Vex nodded with satisfaction. The demonstration would be clean and simple. A few plasma bursts near. The facility would show the humans what hegemony weapons could do without causing excessive casualties. Surely, even these primitive beings would recognize the futility of resistance once they saw their most advanced outpost rendered defenseless. In seconds, "Begin the attack," Vex commanded. "Target the communication arrays and power generators. Leave the habitat domes intact." 3 of his frigates moved into optimal firing positions, their plasma cannons charging with the familiar whine of building energy. The beams lanced out across space, brilliant streams of superheated matter that should have reduced the lunar installation to glowing slag within moments. Instead, something impossible happened. The first plasma beam struck what appeared to be empty space above Luna Station and splashed against an invisible barrier like water hitting glass. Emergency lights began flashing across the facility as hidden systems activated, and the lunar surface itself seemed to shift and change. "Sir," the sensor operator called out in confusion, "I am detecting massive energy signatures from the lunar installation. Something is rising from beneath the surface." What Vex had assumed were small research buildings suddenly revealed themselves as camouflaged weapon platforms. Sections of the lunar surface slid away to expose arrays of strange cannons, unlike anything in hegemony databases. Instead of energy weapons, these devices appeared to fire solid projectiles at incredible velocities. The first railgun burst caught Vex's lead frigate completely off guard. The kinetic projectile, moving at a significant fraction of light speed, punched through the ship's energy shields as if they did not exist. The frigate's hull crumpled around the impact point, and secondary explosions began tearing through its interior. "Impossible," Vex whispered, watching his supposedly superior vessel drift helplessly as its crew struggled to contain catastrophic damage. "Their weapons should not be able to penetrate our shields." A second frigate exploded as multiple railgun rounds struck its power core. The third managed to retreat, but not before taking severe damage from weapons that should not have existed, according to every intelligence report about human capabilities. Vex's communication system activated, and Director Hayes appeared once again. The elderly human looked exactly the same as before, showing no signs of excitement or fear, despite the battle raging around his facility. "Commander Vex," Hayes said calmly, "you have now fired upon Sol Defense Coalition territory. We consider this an act of war. You have 24 hours to withdraw all hegemony forces from our system, or we will be forced to take more decisive action." You knew we were coming," Vex realized, his voice barely above a whisper. "This was all planned." Hayes nodded slightly. "We have been monitoring hegemony expansion for quite some time, Commander. We knew this moment would arrive eventually. We tried to handle this diplomatically, but you chose violence instead." The implications struck Vex like a physical blow. The humans had not been caught off guard by first contact. They had been watching and preparing, allowing the hegemony to believe they were primitive while secretly developing defenses specifically designed to counter hegemony technology. "Our intelligence reports," Vex began, then stopped. Of course the intelligence was wrong. The humans had fed them exactly what they wanted the hegemony to see: a divided primitive species with obsolete technology and no unified defense. Meanwhile, they had been preparing for war. More disturbing information began flowing from his sensors as additional human installations throughout the system activated previously hidden systems. The asteroid mining operations between Mars and Jupiter suddenly revealed themselves as heavily fortified military bases. The research station on Mars deployed enough firepower to level a continent. Even the small orbital platforms around Earth began showing energy signatures that suggested weapons far more advanced than anything in the intelligence reports. "Sir," his science officer said urgently, "I am detecting launch signatures from multiple locations throughout the system. The humans are deploying some kind of fighter craft." Vex watched in growing alarm as swarms of small vessels emerged from hidden bays scattered across human space. These fighters moved with impossible agility, accelerating and changing direction in ways that should have killed their pilots. Their weapon systems appeared to be scaled-down versions of the railguns that had crippled his frigates. "How many?" Vex asked. "Still counting, sir. Current estimate is over 10,000 individual craft, with more launching every minute." The numbers were staggering. Even if each human fighter was inferior to a hegemony vessel, the sheer quantity suggested a military infrastructure far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Worse, these fighters were not behaving like the products of a primitive civilization. Their formations showed tactical sophistication, and their coordination suggested advanced communication systems. A squadron of human fighters swept past Vex's flagship, their pilots clearly visible through transparent canopies. One pilot, a young woman with short brown hair, looked directly at Vex's ship and raised her hand in what appeared to be a rude gesture. The casual defiance was more unnerving than any threat could have been. "Commander," his communication officer reported, "I am receiving thousands of transmissions from the human fleet. They appear to be taunting us." Vex listened to a few of the messages, his universal translator struggling with human idioms and slang. The pilot seemed to be treating the confrontation like some kind of competitive sport, cheerfully discussing tactics and making jokes about hegemony equipment. Their lack of fear was deeply disturbing. Director Hayes sent another transmission, this one accompanied by footage from Earth's surface. Billions of humans were mobilizing with clockwork precision, their supposedly chaotic governments suddenly displaying perfect coordination. Military factories were working around the clock, producing weapons and equipment that looked nothing like the primitive systems in the intelligence reports. "We did try to warn you, Commander," Hayes said with what might have been sympathy. "Humans do not surrender. We adapt, we endure, and we never give up. You may want to inform your superiors that they have made a serious miscalculation." Vex stared at the images of human preparation, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. The hegemony had not discovered a primitive world ripe for conquest. They had stumbled into the territory of a species that had been preparing for this war longer than some hegemony member races had possessed spaceflight. "Send a message to Admiral Corvin," Vex ordered quietly. "Request immediate reinforcement. Maximum priority." Emergency broadcasts filled every communication channel on Earth as news of the attack on Luna Station reached the home world. In cities across the planet, massive screens displayed the same message. Defense Protocol 7 is now active. All citizens report to designated assembly points immediately. What happened next defied everything the hegemony thought they knew about human society. The chaotic divided species from the intelligence reports vanished overnight, replaced by a civilization that moved with the precision of a military machine. Traffic systems automatically rerouted to prioritize military movement. Civilian factories switched to war production without missing a single shift. Every airport, seaport, and transportation hub began moving personnel and equipment with an efficiency that suggested decades of preparation. Commander Vex watched this transformation through captured human communication networks, his growing horror reflected in the faces of his bridge crew. The humans were not panicking or struggling to organize a response. They were revealing that they had been organized all along. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported with a trembling voice, "I am detecting massive energy signatures throughout the Sol system. Previously unknown installations are activating across multiple worlds and asteroid bases. The tactical display updated continuously as more hidden human defenses revealed themselves. What had appeared to be routine mining operations were actually fortified military complexes. Scientific research stations deployed weapons that violated several known laws of physics. Even small civilian habitats suddenly bristled with defensive systems that could challenge a hegemony warship. The most disturbing discovery came when Vex's science officer analyzed the wreckage of a human fighter that had been destroyed during the initial engagement. The pilot, identified as Alex Rodriguez from her recovered identification, had survived the crash and continued fighting with a handheld weapon until her injuries finally proved fatal. "The medical analysis makes no sense," the science officer reported. "This human sustained injuries that should have rendered her unconscious within seconds. Her blood chemistry shows impossible levels of pain-suppressing compounds and stimulants. She continued fighting for nearly 10 minutes after what should have been immediately fatal trauma." Vex studied the recordings of Rodriguez's last stand. watching her drag herself from the wreckage of her fighter and engage two hegemony soldiers with nothing but a primitive projectile weapon and apparently infinite determination. She had killed both soldiers before finally succumbing to her injuries. "How is this possible?" Vex asked. "No species can function with this level of physical damage." "I believe, sir, that humans may be physiologically different from other species, in ways our intelligence failed to detect. Their bodies appear designed for surviving extreme trauma and continuing to function under impossible conditions." More evidence of human resilience came from battlefield recordings throughout the system. Human soldiers routinely shrugged off injuries that would disable members of most hegemony species. Their pilots flew damaged fighters until the very moment of destruction. Even civilian personnel showed a disturbing willingness to risk their lives for military objectives. A new transmission from Director Hayes interrupted Vex's analysis. This time, the human leader was broadcasting from what appeared to be a massive command center buried deep beneath Earth's surface. Behind him, hundreds of technicians worked at stations displaying star charts that showed hegemony positions throughout the local galactic region. "Commander Vex," Hayes said, his voice carrying a new tone of authority, "we have been monitoring your communications with your superiors. We know Admiral Corvin is en route with additional forces. This presents us with an opportunity to discuss the situation more thoroughly." Hayes gestured to one of the displays behind him, which showed a detailed schematic of a hegemony dreadnought. "We have been studying your technology for quite some time. Your energy weapons are impressive, but they rely on predictable physics. Your shields are powerful, but they have specific vulnerabilities. Your ships are fast, but they follow established tactical doctrines." The display changed to show human weapon designs that bore no resemblance to anything in hegemony databases. "Humans, Commander, have a different approach to warfare. We do not follow established doctrines because we write new ones for every engagement. We do not rely on energy weapons alone because we have discovered that kinetic force can be far more effective when properly applied. Most importantly, we do not surrender when the odds are against us. We change the odds." Vex watched in fascination and horror as Hayes outlined human military philosophy. Unlike hegemony species which had developed warfare as an extension of their natural social hierarchies, humans had apparently evolved conflict as an art form. They studied their enemies, adapted their tactics, and treated every battle as a learning experience. "Your intelligence reports were correct about one thing," Hayes continued. "Humans do fight among ourselves constantly. We have been refining the art of warfare for our entire history. Every conflict has taught us something new about tactics, strategy, and the psychology of combat. When you declared war on Earth, you were not just challenging a single species. You were facing the accumulated military knowledge of a civilization that has never known true peace." The implications struck Vex like a physical blow. The human conflicts that hegemony intelligence had dismissed as primitive chaos were actually an extensive training program. Every war, every battle, every skirmish had been preparing humanity for exactly this moment. Hayes activated another display showing human defensive positions throughout the Sol system. "We have 47 major military installations, 312 defensive platforms, over 15,000 active warships, and approximately 200 million trained personnel ready for combat operations. These numbers do not include our reserve forces or civilian militia." "Impossible," Vex whispered. "Our intelligence showed nothing like this level of military preparation." "Because we did not want you to see it," Hayes replied simply. "We have been monitoring hegemony expansion for over 50 years, Commander. We knew you would eventually reach our system. We knew you would evaluate us as a target for conquest. We also knew that you would base your assessment on what we allowed you to observe." The display changed again, showing intercepted hegemony communications dating back decades. We fed your intelligence networks exactly what we wanted them to report. Primitive technology, chaotic governments, minimal defenses. We wanted you to underestimate us because that gave us the greatest tactical advantage. Vex realized that humanity had played a game spanning generations, carefully crafting the hegemony's perceptions while secretly preparing for war. The divided primitive species from the intelligence reports had never existed. It was an elaborate deception designed to ensure that when contact finally came, the hegemony would approach with insufficient force and inadequate preparation. "Sir," his sensor operator called out urgently, "I am detecting new energy signatures. Something large is approaching from the outer system." The tactical display updated to show a massive human vessel emerging from what had appeared to be empty space near Neptune. The ship was unlike anything in hegemony databases, its hull bristling with weapons that defied classification. Director Hayes smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "That would be the Defender, our primary battleship. I thought you might like to see what human military engineering can accomplish when we are not pretending to be primitive." The Defender was 3 times the size of Vex's flagship and appeared to be armed with weapons that operated on principles unknown to hegemony science. Worse, sensor readings suggested it was not alone. Similar vessels were approaching from multiple directions, converging on the hegemony fleet with obvious hostile intent. "Commander," Hayes said softly, "I strongly suggest you withdraw while you still can." Admiral Corvin arrived at the Sol system with enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. His third fleet consisted of 12 dreadnoughts, 47 heavy cruisers, 150 destroyers, and support vessels carrying enough troops to occupy an entire planet. No primitive species had ever faced such overwhelming force and survived. The Admiral's confidence lasted exactly 47 seconds after dropping out of hyperspace, where intelligence reports had described a lightly defended system with scattered outposts. Corvin found himself facing what could only be described as a fortress that happened to occupy an entire solar system. Every planet, moon, and asteroid showed massive defensive installations. Energy signatures indicated weapons platforms that should not have been possible with primitive human technology. Most disturbing of all, the space between worlds crawled with human warships that appeared to have been constructed according to entirely different engineering principles. "Tactical analysis," Corvin demanded, his usual calm shattered by the impossible sight before him. His sensor officer worked frantically at her station, compound eyes flickering as she processed streams of data that defied interpretation. "Sir, I am detecting over 8,000 individual warships, ranging from fighter craft to vessels larger than our dreadnoughts. Energy readings suggest weapons that operate on unknown physical principles. Some of these ships appear to be powered by controlled singularities." Corvin stared at the tactical display in disbelief. Controlled singularities were theoretical technology that even the most advanced hegemony scientists considered impossible to achieve safely. Yet human vessels were apparently using miniature black holes as power sources, generating energy levels that dwarfed anything in the hegemony fleet. "Sir," his communication officer interrupted, "we are receiving a transmission from the human leadership." Director Hayes appeared on the main display, but he was no longer alone. Behind him stood representatives of every major human government and military organization, their faces showing the same calm determination that had characterized every human communication since first contact. "Admiral Corvin," Hayes said formally, "welcome to the Sol system. I'm afraid your timing is unfortunate. We are currently engaged in defensive operations against hostile forces that have attacked our territory without provocation." Corvin found his voice with effort. This entire system, how long have you been preparing for this?" "Approximately," 73 years, Hayes replied matter-of-factly. We detected hegemony expansion patterns in 2387 and calculated that you would reach our system sometime within the next century. We used that time productively. The implications were staggering. While the hegemony had been conquering dozens of worlds and growing complacent in their superiority, humanity had been conducting the largest military buildup in galactic history. They had not just prepared defenses, they had revolutionized their entire civilization around the single goal of surviving contact with a hostile galactic empire. Your intelligence reports, Corvin said slowly. They were all fabricated. Not fabricated, Hayes corrected. Carefully curated. We showed you exactly what we wanted you to see while concealing our actual capabilities. Every transmission you intercepted, every observation your scouts made, every piece of data your intelligence networks collected was part of an elaborate deception designed to ensure you would approach our system with insufficient force. Corvin's tactical officer activated a new display showing the true scope of human preparations. The Sol system had been transformed into a weapon of unimaginable scale. Orbital rings around each planet mounted defensive systems that could target vessels at interplanetary distances. The asteroid belt had been converted into a network of fortified bases connected by transportation tunnels that allowed rapid redeployment of forces. Even the outer planets served as staging areas for fleets that could strike anywhere in the system within hours. The most impressive aspect, Hayes continued, is our manufacturing capability. Every major population center on Earth has been equipped with automated factories capable of producing military equipment around the clock. We can replace our losses faster than you can inflict them. As if to demonstrate this point, new vessels began emerging from hidden construction bays throughout the system. These ships bore the unmistakable signs of recent construction, their hulls still warm from assembly processes, yet they moved with the coordination of veteran crews. Our population is fully mobilized, Hayes explained. Every human adult has received military training. Every civilian facility can be converted to military use within hours. Every citizen understands that the survival of our species depends on preventing hegemony conquest. Corvin watched footage from Earth's surface showing the reality behind this claim. Entire cities had transformed into military production centers. Civilian transportation networks moved troops and equipment with clockwork precision. Children as young as 10 years old practiced emergency procedures that would allow them to support military operations if necessary. You have turned your entire civilization into a military machine, Corvin realized with growing horror. Not turned into, Hayes corrected. Revealed as. Humans have always been a warrior species, Admiral. We simply learned to hide it until we needed it. The human fleet began moving, and Corvin discovered another disturbing truth about his enemies. Hegemony naval doctrine relied on predictable formations and established tactical procedures that had been refined over centuries of successful conquest. Human ships moved in patterns that seemed random until the Admiral realized they were following mathematical principles that optimized their defensive coverage while maximizing offensive potential. Their formations, his tactical officer reported. With obvious confusion, they appear to be based on some kind of evolutionary algorithm that adapts in real time to our movements. Every time we adjust our position, they respond with a counter formation that negates our advantage. More disturbing was the behavior of individual human crews. Hegemony tradition emphasized discipline and adherence to command hierarchies, but human ships seemed to operate with a collective intelligence that allowed instantaneous coordination across thousands of vessels. When one human ship identified a tactical opportunity, every other vessel in the fleet immediately moved to exploit it. "Sir," his weapons officer called out, "the humans are hailing us again." Hayes reappeared, but this time his transmission included technical data that made Corvin's blood freeze. Detailed schematics of hegemony vessels, complete with tactical weaknesses, and suggested methods for exploiting them. Classified information about hegemony military doctrine that should have been impossible for humans to acquire. "We have been studying you for a very long time, Admiral," Hayes said calmly. "We know the maximum range of your weapons, the power output of your shields, the acceleration limits of your vessels, and the tactical preferences of your commanders. We have run millions of combat simulations to determine the most effective methods for defeating hegemony forces." The Admiral stared at intelligence that represented decades of covert observation and analysis. The humans had not simply prepared to defend their system. They had conducted a comprehensive study of their enemy that would have impressed the most dedicated hegemony strategist. "You studied us like laboratory specimens," Corvin whispered. "We studied you like a threat to our survival," Hayes replied. "Which you are." Corvin made his decision with the desperate courage of a commander who understood he faced an impossible situation. "All ships, prepare planet-killer weapons. Target the third planet." If the humans had transformed their system into a fortress, he would demonstrate that hegemony firepower could crack any defense. The combined output of 12 dreadnought planet-killer beams would boil away Earth's oceans and reduce its surface to molten slag. No species could survive such devastation. The massive weapons charged to full power, drawing energy from the combined reactor output of his entire fleet. Space itself seemed to vibrate with contained destructive force as the dreadnoughts prepared to unleash enough energy to crack a planet's crust. "Fire!" Corvin commanded. 12 beams of annihilation lanced toward Earth, carrying enough power to end human civilization in a single, devastating blow. For a moment, victory seemed certain. Then the impossible happened again. The planet-killer beams struck what appeared to be empty space around Earth and splashed harmlessly against a barrier that encompassed the entire world. The energy that should have boiled away oceans instead scattered across a shield system that seemed to draw power from Earth's entire electromagnetic field. "Planetary shield confirmed," Hayes said, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. "Did you really think we would leave our home world undefended?" The reflected energy from the planet-killer beams carved through space in all directions, and one of the reflected beams struck Corvin's own flagship. The Admiral watched in horrified fascination as his supposedly invincible dreadnought began, tearing itself apart under the power of its own weapon. "Retreat," he whispered, then louder. "All ships, retreat to minimum safe distance." But the humans were not finished demonstrating their capabilities. 6 months after the failed invasion, the galaxy faced a new reality that no one had anticipated. The species that was supposed to have been conquered in a matter of days had instead become the dominant military power in local space. Human exploration fleets spread through neighboring star systems with the same methodical efficiency they had shown in their defense, while hegemony member worlds watched nervously from behind hastily constructed defensive positions. The aftermath of Admiral Corvin's defeat had been swift and decisive. Rather than simply driving off the hegemony fleet, human forces had systematically captured or destroyed every vessel that could not escape to hyperspace. The survivors found themselves prisoners of a species that treated warfare like an advanced form of problem-solving, analyzing every aspect of the battle to improve their own capabilities while studying their enemies for future reference. Commander. Vex sat in a comfortable but clearly secure facility on Mars, writing his final report to the Hegemony High Command. The irony was not lost on him that he was composing his analysis using human computer systems that were more advanced than anything the Hegemony possessed. His captors had been polite, professional, and absolutely ruthless in their extraction. of information about hegemony capabilities and intentions. The fundamental error in our assessment, Vex wrote, was assuming that visible chaos indicated actual dysfunction. Human society appeared fragmented because we observed their political debates and disagreements without understanding that these were simply their method of refining ideas before implementation. When they reached consensus on the need to defend their territory, their response was instantaneous and overwhelming. The report contained detailed analysis of human military capabilities, but Vex knew it would be largely useless. Humans did not rely on static technology or fixed tactical doctrines. Every engagement taught them something new, and they applied those lessons with frightening speed. The weapons they had used to defeat Corvin's fleet were already obsolete, replaced by improved designs that incorporated lessons learned from studying captured hegemony equipment. Director Hayes had visited Vex personally to explain the human perspective on the conflict. The conversation had been enlightening in ways that still gave the former commander nightmares. "We never wanted this war," Hayes had said, settling into a chair across from Vex, with the casual manner of someone discussing routine business. "We would have preferred peaceful contact and gradual integration into galactic civilization. But we also understood that the hegemony's expansion model was based on conquest rather than cooperation." Hayes had activated a holographic display showing human intelligence assessments of hegemony territory. "We studied your empire's growth pattern and realized that you had never encountered serious resistance. Your military doctrine, your political structure, your entire civilization was built on the assumption of inevitable victory. That made you predictable." The display had shown detailed analyses of hegemony psychology, sociology, and military doctrine that represented decades of covert observation. Humans had not simply prepared to fight the hegemony, they had conducted a comprehensive study of their potential enemies that would have impressed the most dedicated academic researcher. "The key insight," Hayes continued, "was understanding that your strength was also your greatest weakness. The hegemony succeeded through overwhelming force applied according to established doctrine. Your commanders followed predictable patterns because those patterns had always worked. When you encountered an enemy that did not follow those same patterns, your advantage became a liability." Vex had realized that humans did not think about warfare the way other species did. For most civilizations, military conflict was an extension of their natural social hierarchies or territorial instincts. Humans had apparently evolved warfare as a creative art form, treating each engagement as an opportunity to invent new solutions to tactical problems. The results of this different approach were visible throughout human space. Their defensive installations used principles that hegemony scientists were still struggling to understand. Their vessels incorporated technologies that seemed to violate known physical laws. Most disturbing of all, their crews displayed a casual competence that suggested they considered interstellar warfare to be a routine occupation. The broader implications for galactic civilization were still becoming clear. Human expansion was not following hegemony patterns of conquest and occupation. Instead, they seemed to be establishing a network of allied worlds that maintained their independence while contributing to collective defense. Species that had been subjugated by the hegemony were quietly making contact with human representatives, exploring the possibility of switching sides. The economic impact was equally significant. Human manufacturing capabilities were revolutionizing galactic commerce. Their automated factories could produce goods at rates that undercut traditional hegemony suppliers, while their transportation networks moved cargo with efficiency that made established shipping companies obsolete overnight. More importantly, humans were offering something the hegemony never had: genuine partnership. Where the hegemony demanded submission and tribute, humans proposed mutual benefit and shared technology. Where the hegemony imposed uniform culture and governance, humans celebrated diversity and local autonomy. The contrast was stark enough that several hegemony member worlds had already begun secret negotiations with human diplomats. Director Hayes had personally delivered the terms of what humans called the Soul Accords to the hegemony high command. The document was remarkable, not for what it demanded, but for what it offered. Humans were willing to share their defensive technologies with any species that committed to peaceful expansion and cooperative governance. They proposed a galactic alliance based on mutual protection rather than conquest, with each member world maintaining its sovereignty while contributing to collective security. The alternative, Hayes had made clear, was continued conflict with a species that viewed warfare as an intellectual exercise and treated each battle as an opportunity to test new ideas. Human military doctrine was based on the assumption that any opponent could be defeated through sufficient analysis, preparation, and creative application of force. They approached interstellar war the same way they approached scientific research, with endless curiosity and unlimited willingness to experiment. Vex completed his report with a warning that he knew would reshape galactic politics for generations. Humanity represents a fundamental shift in the balance of power. They do not simply fight to win battles or conquer territory. They fight because they enjoy solving complex problems, and they view every enemy as a puzzle to be solved through superior preparation and innovative tactics. The report continued. Most importantly, humans have demonstrated that they can unite their entire civilization around a single objective while maintaining the diversity of thought that makes them unpredictable. They are not a warrior species in the traditional sense. They are a species of warriors, engineers, scientists, and philosophers who happen to have evolved the ability to make war into an art form. The final section of Vex's analysis contained the recommendation that would likely end his military career. The hegemony should accept human terms immediately and completely. Any attempt to continue hostilities will result in the gradual destruction of our empire by an enemy that grows stronger with each engagement. They do not just defeat their opponents. They learn from them, improve their capabilities, and emerge from each conflict more dangerous than before. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, human colonies were spreading through local space at an unprecedented rate. Unlike hegemony expansion, which focused on resource extraction and strategic positioning, human colonization seemed designed to create a network of mutually supporting civilizations. Each new human world became a center of innovation and manufacturing that strengthened the entire alliance. The most disturbing aspect from a hegemony perspective was that humans appeared to be genuinely enjoying their new role as a galactic power. Their communications were filled with excitement about new technologies, enthusiastic discussions of exploration opportunities, and cheerful plans for future expansion. They treated the transformation of galactic civilization like an entertaining challenge rather than a grim necessity. Admiral Corvin, recovered from his injuries but permanently relieved of command, spent his time studying human tactical innovations and trying to understand how his supposedly invincible fleet had been defeated so thoroughly. His final conclusion was both simple and terrifying. Humans did not fight wars the way other species did, because they did not think about conflict the way other species did. They treat every problem as solvable, Corvin wrote in his private journal. Military resistance is just another engineering challenge. Superior numbers are just a logistics problem. Advanced technology is just a research project. They approach warfare with the same attitude they bring to scientific discovery: unlimited curiosity, infinite patience, and absolute confidence that any obstacle can be overcome through sufficient effort and creative thinking. The galaxy was learning that humanity's true power had never been their technology or their numbers. It was their absolute refusal to accept that anything was impossible, combined with their terrifying ability to make the impossible happen anyway. They did not just adapt to challenges, they transformed challenges into opportunities. As human, exploration fleets pushed deeper into galactic space, carrying offers of alliance and partnership to worlds that had never known anything but hegemony domination. One fact became increasingly clear: the age of conquest was ending. In its place came something entirely new, driven by a species that viewed the galaxy not as territory to be claimed, but as an infinite collection of problems to be solved. The hegemony would either adapt to this new reality or be swept aside by it. Either way, the galaxy would never be the same again.